Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is a special year-end edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so excited. We're sharing some of the best moments from 2019, and we don't want you to miss a second of what we have coming to you in 2020. So please sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Himalaya, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcast. Today we're going to be sharing highlights from 4 great interviews that we had over the course of the year. A little bit later on in the show, you're going to be hearing from Kate Farrell, who is the marketing director at Familius Publishing. We have so many authors who listen to the show. Kate shared some really, really special wisdom with us that can be of use to all authors. We're also going to be speaking with Teacher of the Year from New Jersey, Julia Guthrie. She shares some really great insight into how we can really inspire our kids to become fantastic readers and develop that love of reading and learning that we all want our kids to have. We will also be revisiting my conversation with my friend Phil Joel. Phil is an incredibly talented recording artist. He is a member of Newsboys United, one of the top Christian bands in the entire world. He is also the driving force behind one of my favorite bands right now, Zealand. And he is also the author of Redwoods in Wales. We have a great conversation about that. Really, it's a really wonderful book that families can read with their teens in their tweens. But we're going to begin our look back at 2019 at the beginning of 2019. As you may remember, the Reading with Your Kids podcast was nominated for the iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award. And my beautiful wife and I attended the award ceremony out in Los Angeles back in January of 2019. And while we were there, we had a great time at the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards, but I was especially excited because I had a chance to speak to one of my heroes, Fr Greg Boyle. Fr Greg is the founder of Homeboy Industries. It is the largest gang intervention program in the entire world, and I had a chance to be at Homeboy, and it was an amazing place that was just filled with love. And as I was sitting down speaking with Fr Greg, one of the things I noticed as I was listening to Barking to the Choir over again was that so many of the things that the authors that we have here on the show, the kidlet authors, so many of the things that they're trying to get across to kids with their beautiful picture books are the same kind of messages Fr Greg shares in his book, Barking with the Choir.
Yeah, and you know, of course, you won't find a lot of that language in children's books.
Sure.
But yeah, and a lot of times they're parables. Mm-hmm. You know, they're kind of stories, and the moral of the story, people, I don't write that way, but you can kind of say, oh, this is about compassion, and this is about kinship, and this is about we belong to each other, and so you can always kind of draw those kinds of conclusions as well, which is a nice thing to be able to do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. That was one of the things that struck me and moved me, that idea of radical kinship. How do you think parents can kind of share that with their young kids?
Well, I think parents can do this by challenging their kids, because we're human beings, and so naturally we draw lines. Mm-hmm. Us, them, they belong to our group, they don't belong to our group. This is a bad person, we keep that person out. And so the more parents can get their kids to see in a different way, well, obviously we're all going to be better off, because then you're going to be able to erase margins and erase boundaries and imagine a circle of compassion, and then your kids are going to be able to imagine nobody standing outside that circle. Mm-hmm. So that's the goal. I mean, in the end, you can draw a straight line from that issue, the drawing of lines, and every single social ill we face, you know, from the current government shutdown to immigration issues to the racial divide, they all kind of rest on that notion that somehow there's an us and a them, and we all have to win, and if we have to win, then that means somebody has to lose,
Right.
And so these are dangerous kinds of concepts, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, one of the things that's discouraging for me as a Catholic, as someone who went to a Jesuit school.
Where'd you go?
Boston College High School.
Oh my gosh, I've spoken there.
I mean, you're going to be there in April.
That's right, yeah.
But those lines seem to be, a lot of folks who call themselves Christians and Catholics are the ones with the brightest markers drawing those lines between people.
Well, I think that requires a new way of seeing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between orthopraxis and orthodoxy. You know, people who think it has to look this way, it has to be this way. Orthodoxy people draw lines, but orthopraxis people try to erase them. And so the invitation of the orthopraxis person is to live as though the truth were true, and to be anchored in the gospel, and to somehow move the dial to another place, you know, to somehow I don't know, put first things recognizably first, and that's the hope.
Yeah, one of the things I love in both of the books is the idea of just recognizing and seeing the God that's living inside all of us.
Yeah, it wants to propose something more spacious and expansive in understanding. So we settled for a tiny and a puny and a vindictive and a punitive God, and basically the God created in our own image. And so the invitation is to move beyond that to something more broad and expansive, as I said, and something that is more inclusive. So I think there's nothing more consequential in the world than how we see God, you know, because, you know, you're kind of doomed to imitate the kind of God you believe in. And if your God is puny and tiny, then that's what's going to happen, and that's how you will see. But, you know, here we deal with gang members, and so the notion here is about trying to get underneath criminality, if you will, and how are we to see it, and how are we to understand it, and so that we can get underneath it and have a different diagnosis than the one that we, you know, always embrace.
One of the things I had the pleasure of taking, just finishing a tour here of Homeboy Industries, and one of the things that struck me is the joy that I experienced with everybody that we met. There's just this, there's constant hugging and smiling and, you know, things that people won't necessarily think about when they're thinking, well, my wife who's back at the hotel, when she hears Homeboy, it's like, no, that's not for me. I'm
staying here.
I'm staying here.
In the Marriott.
How did you, I know it's love, it's acceptance, but how were you able to succeed in bringing that joy here where a lot of other programs aren't able to be successful?
I don't know if it's a thing I do. You know, I think this is a sacred place. I think it's created a community of tenderness that's quite compelling, and people feel it the second they walk in. And it's a foreign thing. You know, John Vanier says that tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. So this place kind of invites the world to become that. So it wants to be what it thinks the world is invited to become. And so you can feel it here. Otherwise, nothing works. You can't deliver services unless it's a place of tenderness and trust and where people feel safe. And so that's kind of what this place offers. And once they can enter and inhabit that sacred place of where people feel safe and valued and there's trust, then they can, inhabit the truth of who they are, that they're exactly what God had in mind, what God made them. So then they become that self, and then they can leave here after 18 months resilient people, and they can embrace the adventure, which is the world out there.
Yeah.
And then now they know how to navigate all the crises of intimacy and generativity and all the things that are going to get thrown at them, and they won't get toppled by it this time.
Yeah. If a parent is out there thinking, gee, I don't know if this is something that I want to co-read with my kids or listen to in the car, the audio version of either of your books, what would you say to maybe encourage them and kind of give them a second way of looking at that?
The teenagers will like it. And, it's kind of raw and real and, and it's funny and heartbreaking, and it's I wouldn't say I wrote it for them, but it's certainly accessible to them.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that struck me again yesterday as I was listening on the plane coming back was I think I get the quote right. Every once in a while, a crazy old lady might drop a few turds in your basket, but that doesn't mean you have to eat it.
Let me just say that quote deserves a context. Thank you very much.
Well, would you like to provide the context?
No. It's a story about a brother Jesuit of mine, Mark Torres, who I just saw walk by, who works here, and he was a kid, and he said he was always kind of the Charlie Brown of kids in costumes. He was the last kid to get to the door for the candy, and he did it, this one thing. And this woman said, "Oh my God, I've run out of candy." And then she says, "Oh no, wait a minute. Titi's tutus," she says. And he thinks to himself, Titi's tutus. And all of a sudden she comes back and she drops something in his bag. And then a dog barks, and she goes, "Titi, shush." And he gets back at the end of the day, and this woman has deposited in his bag 2 very firm dog turds. And there was some moral of that story somewhere in there, which you just quoted. But it's more about being curious about the things that happen to us rather than horrified, which I think is a good idea.
Absolutely. We hope you enjoyed that look back at our conversation with Father Greg Boyle. Be sure to check out Barking with the Choir and also Tattoos on the Heart. Right now, we're going to zip on over to the beautiful state of New Jersey to talk to Teacher of the Year, Julia Guthrie. But Julia is a 4th grade teacher. She is also a mom, and so she's right in the mix. She has very young kids and 4th graders who, I don't know, you tell me, 4th grade seems like that age where it's either 4th or 5th grade where a lot happens with the kids, and I think that's the time where a lot of kids make the choice that, I'm going to love learning, I'm going to embrace learning, or just kind of get through it and suffer through it, and hopefully I'll finish.
I totally agree. Yeah. This is an age where I feel that students are kind of creating their reading identities and deciding, I'm a reader or I'm not, which is why it's so important to be able to have high quality books ready for them that they're going to be interested in, and a big library in your class if you can manage that magic.
That is something that I agree with you. it's so important. You're mentioning having a big library in your class. That's one of the beauty. I was telling Julia, my wife is a teacher, and she came home the other day saying, "I have so many books in my class. Like I can't. I need to get rid of some of them." But there's as I travel around and visit schools, there's a real lack of libraries in school. In fact, my wife's school, there are more books in my wife's classroom than there are in the space that they call the library at her school, which is actually a cage and it's locked and kids don't have access to it. So I don't know how it's a library, but expand a little bit more about how important it is for kids to just have easy access to books.
It's critically important. And in a perfect world, you would have a classroom like your wives where their kids have access to a library there. And they would have access to that cage you described, but hopefully something better. And the reason is, we can't create readers without giving kids access to books that they're going to enjoy. I remember when I first started teaching, I had a very limited classroom library because I had moved to 4th grade, so I only had what the school had provided. Mm-hmm. I think I'd gotten hired maybe a month before I started. And that year, I really had a difficult time connecting to as many readers as I could been able to connect to subsequently. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the amount of books we had. There are other factors too, but if I have students who are into graphic novels, I have to have graphic novels for them. If I have a student who's gotten really excited about a series, I want to be able to have the next part of that series for them. If I have a student who's super into nonfiction, I better have the newest, greatest, grossest nonfiction book. That's what my kids are into, the gross nonfiction.
Yes. We have a guest on. I call her the queen of it slipped my mind. The queen of gross STEM or something like that. But Heather Montgomery, she writes great STEM books about roadkill. And nasty stuff
that's what we want to read about too. That's it. They love books. Their favorite one right now is a book about poison in the olden times. They're obsessed with it. They're strange children, but I have that book for them, so they'll read it.
Well, it really is true. I was speaking to somebody not too long ago about required reading. Especially in high school. And I remember there were a lot of books that I had to read for high school. And I don't remember any of them that I liked. And I don't remember anybody telling me why it was important for me to read this book. It was more just like an exercise. You got to lift this many weights. You got to read these words in this book. Talk a little bit more about it, if you can, about that, giving kids what they want. Sure, you want them to love the classics, but if it's not relating to kids, they're not going to have a love of reading. That's the way I kind of feel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's where the place I come from as an educator. Am I educating kids to be able to take a test about reading, or am I trying to create lifelong readers? And the crazy thing is, if you're working towards creating a lifelong readers, if you're giving kids time in class, support, and choice of materials, the testing stuff will come along. Mm-hmm. But I totally agree with you. I also came from that background of I was given, here's the books you have to read. And I loved reading as a kid, but I'm with you. So much of what I was assigned in high school, I read, in college or as an adult, because in high school I just wasn't interested. Mm-hmm. I wanted to read what I wanted to read. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think an issue that is still in our classrooms today. Again, I know when I first started teaching, we had basal readers in our school. So those are those prepackaged, here's the stories you're going to read, and then here's a test you're going to take. And while my kids were very good at doing that, I think by the end of my first year, I sent out a survey and I asked them, using Google Forms, and I asked them how many books they had read this year. And it was appalling. Some of them, the answer was like none. They had just read what we read in class. Mm-hmm. And it was a huge life-changing moment for me. And that was when I started changing my teaching because, what's the point? if I have these kids who are doing well on classroom assessments and then walk out of my classroom and never read a book again, for me, that's not enough.
You know that you just struck a memory. I remember being in 4th or 5th grade, and I was one of those kids who had a lot of extra energy, and they hadn't invented the medicine that seems to help that these days. But one of the things that my teachers would do to help them they would send me down to the library, and we had they called them the SRA kits, and read the story, take a test, read the story. And I could literally, I could just sail through those and do 4 or 5 of them. And the teacher, that's enough, go to the library. I couldn't tell you a thing about any of those books, but in the library, I found this great series, the Todd Moran Adventures, about this kid who was on sailing ships and, and stowaway. And man, I remember it's almost 100 years ago, and I still remember those books, and no one ever talked to me about those. None of the teachers ever asked me about those books. It was these tests and these little things, but no one, kind of dug into that. Gee, this kid is into this thing right now. Let's take advantage of that.
Yeah. That's. I think that's sadly true of a lot of classrooms today.
Now, you are not in a public school. You're in a Catholic school. Does that give you more flexibility in the way you can teach?
I think it's probably similar to most public schools, where it's the administration that really gives me that flexibility. I'm very blessed to have a wonderful principal who really trusts my judgment. I'm the head of our reading department at our school, so he has always been really supportive of me and my team. And when we talked about moving from these basal readers to a more workshop-based program, he was right there with us. Whenever we need something for the library, if he can make it happen, it will happen. So I'm very blessed in that way, just to have a very, very supportive principal standing behind me.
That's awesome. Now, one of the reasons you came to my attention, it wasn't just like I went through a directory of teachers or anything. You're really inspiring a love of learning and a love of books with your kids, but you're not shying away from technology. You're kind of accepting the fact that technology is here, and let's use it to help kids build that love of learning and love of reading. And you came to my attention because of this thing that's called a Global Connections. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So that is like a huge topic, so I'll try to make this concise. So what I like to do is, you're right, kids are into technology. That's not something that's going to go away. And it's something that they're going to use, as adults. So we really do need to be there modeling how to use it appropriately. So something we love to do in my 4th grade classroom is we like to make global connections. So we use different means of technology to connect with classrooms all over the United States and all over the world. And the primary way we do that is through books. So, for example, I was on Twitter, and if you are a teacher and you're not on Twitter, you should totally get on Twitter. It is life-changing. So I was on Twitter, and I had seen a teacher put out a call for a class to connect to. She was in Australia. So the two of us got together via Twitter. We came up with 2 different books we wanted to exchange with each other. So she sent us I'm Australian Too by Mem Fox, and we sent her My Dog is Lost by Ezra Jack Keats. And that was the launching point for our class. We sent these 2 books that we kind of decided encapsulated what our countries were and what they were about. And both of those books, coincidentally, are about about how diverse both of our countries are, how it's filled with people who come from many places, who speak many languages, and how that makes us so beautiful. And through the course of that connection, we wound up going off into a million different topics. It's one thing to give your kids an article about the Great Barrier Reef and have them read that and study it. And it's another thing to be able to connect to a classroom and kids who, that's a huge issue for right now in their country where they live. So it's just to me, it's so much more meaningful than, just us by ourselves, self-contained, looking at our own books. When we can reach out to other kids in other places and connect to them, it's literally, it's opening the world to these kids, and how many amazing skills come with that too. Just, I think, a lot of times we get afraid to do something out of the box, or our administrators usually get afraid to do that because they're worried about, how is this going to tie back into the test or what we have to do here. But, we got writing into that unit. We were certainly sharing reading. We got the new technology standards in where we were, talking and communicating to people across the world. What better way to address those 21st century standards?
We hope you enjoyed our chat with Julia. I'm looking forward to having Julia back on the show sometime in 2020. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. I hope you're looking forward to it too. I also hope you're looking forward to reliving my conversation with my buddy, the one and only Phil Joel. The book kind of starts off with these two images, the Redwoods and Wales, and kind of tell us a little bit about that so we can jump into more of the meat of the book.
Right. Well, I didn't really set about to write a book. I don't have a bucket list, and so writing a book wasn't on it. But I was out in Northern California, and we had some shows in the San Francisco area, and we had a couple of days off. And so I got in a rental car and headed across the Golden Gate Bridge, basically turned left and headed up the one there and headed to a place called Bodega Bay, which I love. I love this little town. It reminds me a lot of New Zealand. And later that night, I was taking a stroll on the beach about 11 o'clock, and it was pretty dark. And I went to walk around a whole bunch of rocks. And instead of this being rocks, which, often up in that part of the world, you do have to navigate your way around the beach, because there's sticks and all kinds of stuff. Instead of this being rocks, I realized as I went to walk around it, this was actually, in fact, a whale. This was not a pile of rocks. And, that doesn't happen too often. It doesn't happen to me, at least, too often. So I was really taken aback with this beautiful big whale that had died there on the beach. And something kind of got me in that moment. I was disturbed by it, and I don't get disturbed by roadkill. I'm not that green, although I'm pretty green, but with stuff. There was something in this. And as it turns out, these whales, they migrate from Alaska down to Mexico. And as they do, especially the younger ones, and this whale was a teenage whale apparently. So especially the young ones, as they're heading down the coast there, they can get distracted. Something can catch their eye, and they'll head off to follow this, whatever it is, and they will end up getting lost. They'll get disoriented and lose their way and get confused and end up on the beach and breathing shallow and dying slowly. And, to me, that was just this really powerful yet tragic metaphor for how so many people, find themselves in life. And it doesn't take too long. We find a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers in this space where they're just confused. They're off course. They don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're headed. And they don't know what's happened. And, so that was this one sort of metaphor in that moment that I felt. And then I headed up the next day up the coast to, and I had to come inland at some point. I had to go back, And so I turned on this road that ran alongside a river. And as I did, it wasn't too long before I was just canopied and enveloped in shade, and in the shade of these beautiful redwood trees. So I was in the redwoods, and these things are beautiful, and they're magnificent. They're breathtaking. I don't use the word awesome too often, but they are awesome. They're just awe-inspiring. And this picture was correct. This whole thing felt right. These trees with their roots running deep, drinking from that river that ran alongside the road, and they're growing together, and they're growing tall and straight, and they're providing shade for me in my rental car. It was just this perfect scene of this is how it's meant to be. Mm-hmm. And for me, it resonated in a biblical kind of way. We read in the Psalm 1, right in the heart of the Bible there, talking about our lives and as people drinking deep of God's goodness. And then later on in the Bible in Jeremiah, we read also about the man who trusts in the Lord, whose hope is in him. He'll be like a tree planted by the river with his roots running deep. And when the heat comes, he won't be afraid, but rather he'll get greener and he'll bear fruit. And so that's God's vision for our lives, for all of us, every life on the planet. He wants us to drink in the goodness of who he is and feed on his faithfulness, because he's good and he's trustworthy, and our lives will get greener and we will bear fruit being love and joy and peace and all that good stuff. So that was the metaphor, 2 metaphors that I began to write this book based upon. And I didn't really mean to write a book. I just felt to write that story down, that experience. And then I just kept going, Jed, and I just connected the dots. But I ended up writing a book. So, yeah.
Well, we're awfully glad that you wrote a book. And those are really powerful images, especially to get, one day after another. And
right.
As you were talking about the whale being distracted, and yeah, I agree. There's so many kids are distracted these days, and there's so much to distract, and not only kids, but there's so much to distract us.
Oh yeah.
You and I are speaking through the magic of technology, and it is magical, but it can be kind of dangerous too, I think.
Yeah, it can. It can be. I mean, you're right. We live in this really wild day and age, which is it's incredible. I love being alive in this exciting time where all sorts of new things are coming, into the foray and all kinds of new technologies. But often these things can, if we're not careful, they can turn around and bite us, and they pose as friends at different points and promise certain things, and then after a while we realize they're taking more than they're giving. And for me, I in the book I take a look at the social media issue in our time. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I can post photographs of my kids and my backyard chickens, and my relatives in New Zealand can see them. If I wanted to, if I was actually an active social media person, which it's amazing stuff, right? Years gone by, obviously I had to stick photographs, develop photographs down at the chemist or the pharmacy, and stick them in envelopes and send them. And it would take 2 weeks,
Sure.
So yes, amazing things going on, but and we're more connected than ever in some ways, but then we're also more lonely than ever. This next generation coming through is the most medicated and depressed and suicidal bunch we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to put some of these things that we're all involving ourselves in under the microscope and sort of say, hey, is this worth my time? Is this taking more than it's giving? Is this promising a lot but actually taking more out of me than I'm getting? What do we need to do? Mm-hmm. And as parents, as an older generation, we need to help this next generation coming through. We need to help them be courageous in certain, some of them need to not just back away from it a little bit and curb their use. Some people really just need to trash certain things. Need to just be brave enough to go, you know what? I don't need that app. I don't need that activity in my life. Mm-hmm. I need to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And, because it's trashing me. So maybe it's time for me to trash it. So yeah. I sort of, I throw some of those things out there in order to hopefully jolt some people into, really putting some of the ways they're spending their time and energy under the microscope. Just throw it under the microscope, take a look and see if it's really something we need to be doing.
We hope that you are enjoying our look back at 2019, sharing some of our favorite moments from 2019 here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. So many of our listeners are authors of children's books or aspiring authors of children's books. So many parents out there have an idea that they want to get out there and to become a children's author. They have these stories that they've been sharing with their kids that they've been sitting on, percolating with for years and years and years. And we have a great guest for you, Kate Farrell. She's become such a great friend of the show. She is a marketing director for Familius Publishing, and she came on the podcast to very generously share some insights she has into children's publishing and especially in marketing children's books. Now, am I right in thinking that the time to start building your audience and your presence on social media, it really has to start before the book is written and published? Am I right about that?
I mean, I wouldn't say it has to, because I don't want anyone to feel like they can't publish a book if they don't have really huge platforms on social. That's definitely not true. But I would also say it's never too early to set up those things and try to, create an email list or just get people excited about you and the things that you're working on. And as far as marketing goes, I think my perspective is just that it should be really natural. You've worked so hard on this baby, your book, and you've put so much time and energy into it. It should be easy to go on and tell people that you're excited about the process, and tell people, hey, I just saw the cover. Here it is. Let's get excited. Let's share this if you can. And I think people will be excited for you. So I think just to keep that energy and to keep in mind that it's kind of an endurance event and does last after the book comes out too. I think that's really important.
Yeah. One of the terms that I use, especially in terms of promoting different episodes, is I always mention that this author is on to celebrate their new book, because I really just think that's the reality. It's like, yeah, people go on podcasts to sell their books, but for the most part, the guests that come on our show are just so excited about their books, and the books are really important to them. And it's almost, almost the idea of just telling people about the book is more important than actually selling the book for a lot of authors.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. So how did you get into marketing? Is this working with a publishing house? Is that something that you always dreamed of?
So it's actually a little bit of a funny story. I grew up thinking I was going to be a psych, English, and bio triple major. And I always loved to read, carried books with me to my cousin's basketball games, on my first dates, everywhere. And I guess I just thought it was a completely mind-consuming just passion that I had, but I never really thought that it could be a job for me. And then when I was 15, I read the Hunger Games series. Are you familiar with those? The trilogy?
I certainly am.
Okay, so I read those books, totally fell in love with them, and none of my friends had read them yet. So I really wanted to talk about them because I was super excited about the books. Went online and found some really old school book forums and just started talking about books way too much on those forums. I would come home from school, my math homework would wait a long time to be addressed by me, and I would just go and discuss different books. Started out mostly with Hunger Games, Harry Potter, and then I was just talking about everything I was reading, and made a lot of really neat internet friends, had some great conversations about plot and character and predicting what was going to happen next. And then eventually I was posting so much on those sites that I was asked to take over a Hunger Games news site. It was actually right after Catching Fire came out. So they asked me to run a podcast for the release of the book at a local Borders bookstore. Do you remember Borders too? Now they're gone.
I do, and I miss them.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was a great space, and we had a really fun live podcast for that website. Then I was asked to officially take over the site and be a co-admin. So the domain owner and I were co-admins, and we were both on every day, posting Twitter content, Facebook. We had a YouTube page, and we would post news. Fan art submissions would come to us. We did a lot of giveaways. And then Scholastic and Lionsgate actually ended up asking, I think it was the top 5 or 6 fan sites at the time to kind of play a role in supporting the movie promotion and the last book, Mockingjay. So I kind of just hit the timing right and ended up being a part of their press releases, and people would go on and find different pieces of news on different sites. So it was almost like a mini press tour with information kind of sprinkled across the internet on those top sites for people to find. We had about 40,000 viewers a day at the peak. So I'm like 16 years old writing content that is going to 40,000 people. And this is when fan sites were, the Harry Potter fan sites were the original ones, but this was kind of before blog marketing, I think, had really taken off. I think Lionsgate and Scholastic did a really great job of noticing how much people and fans on these sites were invested in the stories and kind of taking advantage of that and using us to just naturally promote their products and their books. And so I kind of just fell into it like that and ended up working on the fan site for almost 7 years, through the rest of high school, through college. Ended up in sophomore year, I took the Familius internship in marketing. Very natural step because I'd been writing press releases for a long time at that point. And then I ended up making my own major about books and films and how they impact communities and create conversations for social change and inspire people. And so that's how I fell into this job. And then right out of college, I worked for the Screen Actors Guild Awards out in LA for a little while. Kind of the book to film background led to that. And then the position at Familius opened up.
I think it's wonderful. There's so many people that I hear that they have this vision. Well, I'm going to do this. Even my little niece is telling me, well, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be this. And they have their whole kind of life marked out for themselves, which is really good to have these dreams. But it's wonderful that you're able, and it's important for everybody to kind of be able to roll with the punches and be able to deal with the little surprises that life throws your way. And it certainly sounds like you dealt with them really well.
Thank you. I feel extremely lucky to have had the opportunities that I've had, and I'm also very grateful that I've had a supportive family who let me kind of pursue my dreams and passions when there's not really a guarantee. Like when I was creating my own major, I'm not sure if they quite knew where it was going to go, but I'm lucky that I had support.
That's wonderful. Now, one of the things you mentioned a couple of things that I want to talk about. I did want to ask you about carrying a book on a first date, but I'm going to leave that one set. Can't imagine what your date would have thought when you showed up with a book.
You have to bring a very big purse. That's the key.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier on was that marketing has changed, and I know myself marketing my live educational magic shows. What worked for me 5 years ago doesn't work at all these days. And so marketing has really changed so much. And one of the things that it excites me, it terrifies me, is the idea that you can come out of, I know you took a different path, but even somebody coming out of college with a marketing degree, maybe even a master's in marketing, whatever they learned in college as they're graduating here in June of 2019, a lot of that information is going to be obsolete by June of 2021.
It's definitely an intense time of change right now. And I think you kind of just have to jump in and do what you can to keep your eye on everything. I mean, one of the things that's difficult about marketing and many jobs really is that there are so many opportunities out there to collaborate or to grow or to pitch things that I don't think that any of us will ever feel like our work is done. Like at the end of the day, I always have 600 more people that I wanted to pitch, but you kind of just have to be aware that you're trying and monitor everything, like I said, that's going on. So whether that's subscribing to marketing newsletters, going on and reading different trade publications. They have awesome newsletters too, and that gives you a really good feel for what's going on with competitors, with different multimedia platforms are often covered in like the PW newsletters, Perkis, Shelf Awareness, forward reviews. Like the trade publications put out really great online content as well that you can spend, a little bit of time every day and at least get some basic facts of what's going on, and that will keep you in the know and sort of direct you to where you can go to learn more as well.
Mm-hmm. So much to learn, and I don't want any authors out there to feel overwhelmed and to just throw up your hand and go, well, I'm not even going to try to write a book now. This is what is going on with it. There's a lot of it. You take one little step at a time. And,
Absolutely.
And, you're writing your book out there, and it's special to you. If you write your book and you're able to express this idea and share it, whether you're sharing it with just your family, you're sharing with a couple of people in your hometown, or maybe it blows up and it becomes the next Hunger Games. It doesn't matter. The idea is getting it out there, and that's where the joy comes in, is sharing your ideas with the world, I think.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned this to you before, but if you have one reader who picks up your book and that book becomes special to them, I know from a publisher's standpoint, obviously we have to care about sales too, because we want the book to be getting to a lot of different families. But if you have one reader that book leaves an impression on them, it's worth it, right? You've put so much effort into it, and to have it be something that can make a change in someone's life, that's just amazing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, and the more you know about social media and marketing, if you're a mom at home, you think, why do I want to learn this? I don't want to be a marketer. This is really important stuff that you can share with your kids. Because the more knowledge you have about social media and using it to market, the more knowledge you're going to be able to share with your kids to help them stay safe when they're online, and how they can help, put out whatever message it is about themselves that they really want to have out there on social media.
Oh, absolutely. I totally believe that. And I think social media should just kind of, if you're comfortable being honest with your portrayal of yourself, and it's kind of just a way for you to share your thoughts across different platforms. And I don't think it has to be forced or fake at all. Just take your excitement about your projects and make sure you share it. And I think it can really be natural if you focus on staying grounded and reflecting every day on the process of putting together the book. You can just post that online.
Yeah, absolutely. Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We'll be starting 2020 off with a conversation with Heidi Bryant. She is the author of the Catnip Story series. She'll be joining us from Kent in the United Kingdom. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Wow, we've had such a great year here on the podcast. 2019 was such a fantastic year. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Phil Joel. Check out Redwoods in Wales. Fr Greg Boyle. Be sure to check out Barking to the Choir. I want to thank Kate Farrell from Familius Publishing. And I also want to thank our Teacher of the Year, Julia Guthrie. I want to thank all of the guests that have been on this show in 2019. Way too many to mention here. I also want to thank the folks who've helped the show week after week, episode after episode. Of course, you hear about my amazing producer, Fatima Khan. You can check out her blog. She publishes it with every new episode of the show. You can find that on readingwithyourkids.com. We also have a new ambassador to authors. She's been helping us with our author services, Peggy Cotto. She is fantastic. And if you are an author and you're looking for a little bit of help marketing your children's book, we very well will be talking to Peggy in the near future. I want to thank my beautiful daughter Alejandra, with some really great advice, behind the scenes advice. I also want to thank my son Christopher. He has given us some great suggestions for guests and put us in touch with some great guests over the course of the year, over the course of the lifetime of the podcast. Of course, I want to thank my beautiful wife for all of the support that she has given me here throughout our beautiful marriage. We're coming up on 30 years of marriage together. That is just such a blessing. Most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. I want to wish you and your family the very, very best to come here in the year 2020. I hope it is a fantastic year for you. I hope that you're with us for every episode of the show. Please do not be shy. If you have suggestions, please let us know what they are. You can contact us at readingwithyourkids.com. I also want to thank you very, very much, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, for helping to make our world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.